So we're going to do a quick lesson on the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is here. It is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. There's a lot of videos out there that have all sorts of fun songs to help you remember it. And my goal with this video is not to help you remember it, but to help you be able to use it when you have it memorized. So, first thing you have to know is we're looking for any quadratic in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. Now, this has to be equal to 0, and we're only solving for a quadratic. So what that means is that the highest exponent is x squared, and you really want to write it in descending order. X squared, x, number, 0. Now, the x and the c and the number can be missing, but the highest exponent has to be x squared for us to use the quadratic formula. So an equation we can use the quadratic formula would be something like 2x squared plus 3x minus 4 equals 0. And the key with the quadratic formula, and I just made up that problem because I kind of expected it not to work all that well, is it really doesn't matter how messy these numbers are, whether they work out nicely or not. You can plug into the quadratic formula and solve any quadratic. That's the key to them. If you've been solving with factoring up to this point, factoring only works for factorable quadratics. And if you can factor, hey, that's going to be the easiest way to go. But the second that you can't factor, then you're stuck. You're stuck doing something like completing the square or the quadratic formula, which will always work. Alright, so the quadratic formula is probably the most direct thing. So this is our a, this is our b, and this is our c. Now, we're not taking the x's with us. We're just saying that a is 2, b is 3, and c is negative 4. And then we plug into our quadratic formula. So negative b. So b is 3, so negative b would be negative 3. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So it's 3 squared, but I would encourage you to try to do that in your head without writing it down. Say, okay, b is 3, 3 squared is 9. The problem is the second that b becomes out negative, then people have a tendency of putting in their calculator and squaring it the wrong way without parentheses. All right, it's always minus. It's always minus 4. A is 2, and c is negative 4. All over 2 times a, which is 2. Alright, so all we do now is this sort of operation. So you have to realize that square root like this has a big set of parentheses. So you want to do everything that's inside the square root first. So negative 3 plus or minus the square root of, well, 3 squared is 9. And then I would just multiply these left to right. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 4 is 32. And then you also got to be careful. You have 2 negatives here. That's going to be plus 32. All over 2 times 2, which is 4. Alright, from here, we get negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 plus 32 is 41 over 4. And 41 itself, you want to try to break it down however you normally break down a root. 41 is prime, so this problem is done. And that's really it. So, let's try another problem. Alright, so let's go with this next equation. X squared minus 6x plus 5 equals 0. Now, if you're good at factoring, you probably could see how this factors in your head. But we're going to run the quadratic formula on it anyway, because at this point, the quadratic formula will always work. So, negative b. So b is our negative 6. So b equals negative 6. Negative b would be a positive 6. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So negative 6 squared, and that's what I would really encourage you to do in your head. B squared would be 36 minus 4 times a, and a is the number in front of x squared, so that's 1, and c, which is 5, all over 2 times a, which we said is the number in front of x squared, so a is 1. Let's write these down really quick just so we have them all. So if you have a negative, it goes with the b term. This is a positive 5, so c is a positive 5. Number in front of x squared we don't see is a positive 1. So 2a on the bottom. So from here, 6 plus or minus the square root of 36, positive 36. You can use your calculator, put your parentheses around it. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4 times 5 is negative 20 all over 2. So we get 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 20, 16 over 2. Alright, here comes the fun part. Square root of 16 is 4. If you break it down, you get 4 and 4, you get 4 normally. So this is 6 plus or minus 4 over 2. So how in the world do you do 6 plus or minus 4? Plus or minus throws people off, and a lot of people want to circle this because the last problem we did was a root that didn't break down and it was done. But now that I have this, I have to do it in two separate parts. 6 plus 4 divided by 2 and 6 minus 4 divided by 2. Just treat them like two separate entities. 6 plus 4 is 10 and 6 minus 4 is 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5 and 2 divided by 2 is 1. So x equals 5 or 1. You can always check these out by plugging them back into the original and seeing what works. Seeing if it works or not. Alright, let's try one that's missing something. So let's go with 3x squared. Let's make it negative 3x squared plus 5. Now there's a couple things. You can solve this directly, but let's pretend that we don't see that. So let's see here. What's a? It's the number in front of x squared. So a is negative 3. B is the number in front of x, but there are no x's here. So what you want to think is plus 0x in the middle. You don't have to write it, but b is 0 and c is 5. So once we have realized that, we're ready to go. If b is 0, there is no negative b. It's negative 0, which I don't really have to write. Plus or minus 0 squared minus 4. A is negative 3 and c is 5. All over 2 times negative 3. Alright. Well, I ended up with 0 plus or minus the square root of, well, 0. Negative and negative makes a positive. 4 times 3 is 12. Times 5 is 60. Over negative 6. So I end up with plus or minus root 60 over negative 6. Now what you might want to do is reduce this by multiplying or dividing 6 into both top and bottom. But this is a root and this is not, so I can't do that. We can try to break up root 60. So 60 is, well, 6 and 10 is probably the easiest way. 2 and 3, and then 2 and 5. Got a pair of 2's, so this is going to be plus or minus 2 root, and the ones that don't have pairs stay inside, 15 over negative 6. So what we do is we have a 2 and a 6 and reduce. You can reduce the numbers, but you can't reduce the number into a root. So 2 goes into 2 once, 2 goes into negative 6 3 times. Now, since we only have one term, a positive divided by a negative is a negative, a negative divided by a negative is a positive, the plus or minus says I need both signs. So that plus or minus can absorb this negative. It's kind of a tricky idea there, but I don't have to worry too much about the negatives, if that makes sense. So what we end up with is x equals, the 2 goes into 2 once, 2 goes into 6 3 times, oh, plus or minus out front, and then root 15. Now, people ask, do I need the 1? Not really. Does it hurt to be there? No. So I can write it like this, or I can get rid of the 1, and I've got it. Let's try another one. Let's go with, let's go with 4x squared minus 3x plus 5. Alright, well, let's see what happens. So we have negative b, so negative negative 3 is a positive 3, plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared. So we want to try to do that in our head. It's 9 minus 4 times 4 times 5. All over 2 times a, which is 4. Alright, let's see what we get. 3 plus or minus the square root of. Now, a lot of people write this whole step in their calculator. 9 minus 4 times 4 times 5. If you write it just like that, you're good. I wouldn't put the square root in because your calculator will not break down square roots. So 9 minus, well, 16 times 5 ends up being 80 over 8. So we end up with 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 71 over 8. Now I can't really break down 71, but the negative, I can't leave a negative inside a root either. So anytime you have a negative inside of your root, you end up with an imaginary solution. So this will be written as 3 plus or minus I root 71 over 8. And you want to try to break down your 71. But if you have a negative, it comes out and becomes an imaginary number. So let's say we've got 2x squared minus x equals negative 5. So the first thing you have to do, I'll write our steps out here, is you have to set it equal to 0. If it's not equal to 0, we mentioned in the beginning, your c value is going to be messed up. This has to be equal to 0. So 2x squared minus x plus 5 equals 0. Alright, so set it equals 0. Second thing is we plug in our formula. So negative b, b is negative 1, so negative negative 1, positive 1, plus or minus negative 1 squared is 1, minus 4 times 2 times 5. Okay. All over 2 times a, which is 2. So 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 minus, that's 8 times 5, 40 over 4. So we plug into our formula. Our third step is to use order of operations to simplify. So 1 plus or minus root negative 39 over 4. Now 39 itself is not a prime. It's 3 and 13. But 13 is, so I can't break that down anymore. All I can do is take out the negative and make it an I out front. And this is as far as this particular problem goes. Let's try to make that better. And in the end, order of operations is simplify, and then if you can, reduce your answer. At the end of every problem, you want to check if you can. And you check this by plugging back in. Now this is kind of a hard thing to plug back into the original equation. What I would do, if I wanted to, is I probably would write 1 plus I root 39 and then divide that by 4 in my calculator, and then I would use the store button or use the answer button. So to answer squared minus answer, and show that that equals negative 5. But these 5 steps should take you through most of the problems. They get a little tougher because you could have fractions for your numbers. These numbers in here could be decimals. But you need some experience, that's all. Good luck.